online with us this evening, and she would like to record. She would like us to record this meeting, and so she can see it later on. Okay, is done. The recording is possible now. So we'll start from verse 22. Here we go.
Verse 22. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Bishop Newton presents the following reading as agreeing better with the original. And the arms of the overflower shall be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. The expressions signify revolution and violence, and in the fulfillment we should look for the arms of Tiberius, the overflower, to be overflown, or in other words, for him to suffer a violent death. To show how this was accomplished, we again have recourse to the Encyclopedia Americana, article Tiberius. Acting the hypocrite to the last, he disguised his increasing debility as much as he was able, even affecting to join in the sports and exercises of the soldiers of his guard. At length, leaving his favorite island, the scene of the most disgusting debaucheries, he stopped at a country house near the promontory of Misenum, where on the 16th of March, 37, he sank into a lethargy, in which he appeared dead. And Caligula was preparing with a numerous escort to take possession of the empire, when his sudden revival threw them into consternation. At this critical instant Macro, the Praetorian prefect, caused him to be suffocated with pillows. Thus expired the Emperor Tiberius, in the 78th year of his age, and 23rd of his reign, universally execrated. The Prince of the Covenant unquestionably refers to Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Prince, who is to confirm the covenant 1 week with his people. Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 to 27. The prophet, having taken us down to the death of Tiberius, now mentions incidentally an event to transpire in his reign, so important that it should not be passed over, namely the cutting off of the Prince of the Covenant, or in other words, the death of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to the prophecy, this took place in the reign of Tiberius. Luke informs us in chapter 3, verses 1 to 3, that in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, John the Baptist commenced his ministry. The reign of Tiberius is to be reckoned, according to Prideaux, Dr. Hales, Lardner, and others, from this elevation to the throne, to reign jointly with Augustus, his stepfather, in August A.D. 12. His 15th year would therefore be from August A.D. 26 to August A.D. 27. Christ was 6 months younger than John, and is supposed to have commenced his ministry 6 months later, both, according to the law of the priesthood, entering upon their work when they were 30 years of age. If John commenced in the spring, in the latter portion of Tiberius's 15th year, it would bring the commencement of Christ's ministry in the autumn of A.D. 27. And right here the best authorities place the baptism of Christ, it being the exact point where the 483 years from B.C. 457, which were to extend to the Messiah the Prince, terminated. And Christ went forth proclaiming that the time was fulfilled. From this point we go forward 3 years and a half to find the date of the crucifixion. For Christ attended but 4 Passovers, and was crucified at the last one. 3.5 years from the autumn of A.D. 27 brings us to the spring of A.D. 31. The death of Tiberius is placed but 6 years later, in A.D. 37. See on chapter 9, verses 25 to 27.
Anyone of us would like to say anything about this? For example, I didn't know that Christ was 6 months younger than John. I need to look this up in the Bible. But obviously they studied this, so they know what they're talking about. Any other comments? No. Okay, we'll move on.
Verse 23. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. The him with whom the league here spoken of is made must be the same power which has been the subject of the prophecy from the 14th verse, and that this is the Roman power is shown beyond controversy in the fulfillment of the prophecy in 3 individuals, as already noticed, who successively ruled over the Roman Empire, namely Julius, Augustus, and Tiberius Caesar. The first, on returning to the fort of his own land in triumph, stumbled and fell, and was not found, verse 19. The second was a raiser of taxes, and he reigned in the glory of the kingdom, and died neither in anger nor in battle, but peacefully in his own bed, verse 20. The third was a dissembler, and one of the vilest of characters. He entered upon the kingdom peaceably, but both his reign and life were ended by violence. And in his reign the Prince of the Covenant, Jesus of Nazareth, was put to death upon the cross, verses 21 and 22. Christ can never be broken or put to death again. Hence, in no other government, and at no other time, can we find a fulfillment of these events. Some attempt to apply these verses to Antiochus, and make one of the Jewish high priests the Prince of the Covenant, though they are never called such. This is the same kind of reasoning which endeavors to make the reign of Antiochus a fulfillment of the little horn of Daniel 8, and it is offered for the same purpose, namely, to break the great chain of evidence by which it is shown that the Advent doctrine is the doctrine of the Bible, and that Christ is now at the door. But the evidence cannot be overthrown. The chain cannot be broken. Having taken us down through the secular events of the empire to the end of the 70 weeks, the prophet in verse 23 takes us back to the time when the Romans became directly connected with the people of God by the Jewish League, BC 161, from which point we are then taken down in a direct line of events to the final triumph of the Church and the setting up of God's everlasting kingdom. The Jews, being grievously oppressed by the Syrian kings, sent an embassy to Rome to solicit the aid of the Romans, and to join themselves in a league of amenity and confederacy with them. 1 Maccabees chapter 8. Prideaux, volume 2, page 166. Josephus, Antiquities, book 12, chapter 10, section 6. The Romans listened to the request of the Jews, and granted them a decree, couched in these words: the decree of the Senate concerning a league of assistance and friendship with the nation of the Jews. It shall not be lawful for any that are subject to the Romans to make war with the nation of the Jews, nor to assist those that do so, either by sending them corn, or ships, or money. And if any attack be made upon the Jews, the Romans shall assist them as far as they are able. And again, if any attack be made upon the Romans, the Jews shall assist them. And if the Jews have a mind to add to or to take from this league of assistance, that shall be done with the common consent of the Romans. And whatever addition shall thus be made, it shall be of force. This decree, says Josephus, was written by Eupolemus, the son of John, and by Jason, the son of Eleazar, when Judas was high priest of the nation, and Simon his brother was general of the army. And this was the first league that the Romans made with the Jews, and was managed after this manner. At this time the Romans were a small people, and began to work deceitfully or with cunning, as the word signifies. And from this point they rose by a steady and rapid ascent to the height of power, which they afterward attained.
Any comments on this bit?
Yeah, I love the way it vindicates our prophetic timeline. Exactly. And this league of assistance thing, it's kind of, is that a kind of church and state type thing
Yeah, I was thinking so.
between Rome and God's people? That's quite interesting as well, isn't it?
What I find interesting is that was the Jews' initiative.
Yeah,
Interesting, isn't it?
wonderful, yeah. League of Assistance. He comes up with these words, and I have to quickly Google the word to see what it means, because I didn't know what amity meant. It sounds obvious, you know, it usually means what I kind of guess it means. Amity means friendliness, cooperation.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Okay, any other comments? Or shall we move on? Okay, let's move on.
Verse 24, He shall enter peacefully, even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, and spoil, and riches. Yes, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. The usual manner in which nations had before the days of Rome entered upon valuable provinces and rich territory was by war and conquest. Rome was now to do what had not been done by the fathers or the fathers' fathers, namely, receive these acquisitions through peaceful means. The custom before unheard of was now inaugurated of kings leaving by legacy their kingdoms to the Romans. Rome came into possession of large provinces in this manner, and those who thus came under the dominion of Rome derived no small advantage therefrom. They were treated with kindness and leniency. It was like having the prey and spoil distributed among them. They were protected from their enemies and rested in peace and safety under the aegis of the Roman power. The latter portion of this verse, Bishop Newton gives the idea of forecasting devices from strongholds instead of against them. This the Romans did from the strong fortress of their seven-hilled city. Even for a time, doubtless a prophetic time, 360 years. From what time are these years to be dated? Probably from the event brought to view in the following verse. Verse 25, And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. By verses 23 and 24, we are brought down this side of the league between the Jews and the Romans, BC 161, to the time when Rome had acquired universal dominion. The verse now before us brings to view a vigorous campaign against the king of the south, Egypt, and the occurrence of a notable battle between great and mighty armies. Did such events as these transpire in the history of Rome about this time? They did. The war was the war between Egypt and Rome, and the battle was the Battle of Actium. Let us take a brief view of the circumstances that led to this conflict. Mark Antony, Augustus Caesar, and Lepidus constituted the triumvirate which had sworn to avenge the death of Julius Caesar. This Antony became the brother-in-law of Augustus by marrying his sister Octavia. Antony was sent into Egypt on government business, but fell a victim to the arts and charms of Cleopatra, Egypt's dissolute queen. So strong was the passion he conceived for her that he finally espoused the Egyptian interests, rejected his wife Octavia, to please Cleopatra, bestowed province after province upon the latter to gratify her avarice, celebrated a triumph at Alexandria instead of Rome, and otherwise so affronted the Roman people that Augustus had no difficulty in leading them to engage heartily in a war against this enemy of their country. This war was ostensibly against Egypt and Cleopatra, but it was really against Antony, who now stood at the head of Egyptian affairs. And the true cause of their controversy was, says Prideaux, that neither of them could be content with only half of the Roman Empire. For Lepidus, having been deposed from the triumvirate, it now lay between them, and each being determined to possess the whole, they cast the die of war for its possession. Antony assembled his fleet at Samos, 500 ships of war, of extraordinary size and structure, having several decks, one above another, with towers upon the head and stern, made an imposing and formidable array. These ships carried 200,000 foot and 12,000 horse. The kings of Libya, Cilicia, Cappadocia, Paphlagonia, Commagena, and Thrace were there in person, and those of Pontus, Judea, Lycaonia, Galatia, and Media had sent their troops. A more splendid and gorgeous military spectacle than this fleet of battleships, as they spread their sails and moved out upon the bosom of the sea, the world has rarely seen. Surpassing all in magnificence came the galley of Cleopatra, floating like a palace of gold beneath a cloud of purple sails. Its flags and streamers fluttered in the wind, and trumpets and other instruments of war made the heavens resound with notes of joy and triumph. Antony followed close after in a galley of almost equal magnificence, and the giddy queen, intoxicated with the sight of the warlike array, short-sighted and vainglorious, at the head of her infamous troop of eunuchs, foolishly threatened the Roman capital with approaching ruin. Caesar Augustus, on the other hand, displayed less pomp, but more utility. He had but half as many ships as Antony, and only 80,000 foot, but all his troops were chosen men, and on board his fleet were none but experienced seamen, whereas Antony, not finding mariners sufficient, had been obliged to man his vessels with artisans of every class, men inexperienced and better calculated to cause trouble than to do real service in time of battle. The season being far consumed in these preparations, Caesar made his rendezvous at Brundusium, and Antony at Corcyra, till the following year. As soon as the season permitted, both armies were put in motion on both land and sea. The fleets at length entered the Ambracian Gulf in Epirus, and the land forces were drawn up on either shore in plain view. Antony's most experienced generals advised him not to hazard a battle by sea with his inexperienced mariners, but send Cleopatra back to Egypt, and hasten at once into Thrace or Macedonia, and trust the issue to his land forces, who were composed of veteran troops. But he, illustrating the old adage, whom God wishes to destroy, he first makes mad, infatuated by Cleopatra, seemed only desirous of pleasing her, and she, trusting to appearances only, deemed her fleet invincible, and advised immediate action. The battle was fought September 2, B.C. 31, at the mouth of the Gulf of Ambracia, near the city of Actium. The world was the stake for which these stern warriors, Antony and Caesar, now played. The contest, long doubtful, was at length decided by the course which Cleopatra pursued, for she, frightened at the din of battle, took to flight when there was no danger, and drew after her the whole Egyptian fleet. Antony, beholding this movement, and lost to everything but his blind passion for her, precipitately followed, and yielded a victory to Caesar, which had his Egyptian forces proved true to him, and had he proved true to his own manhood, he might have gained. This battle doubtless marks the commencement of the time mentioned in verse 24, and as during this time devices were to be forecast from the stronghold, or Rome, we should conclude that at the end of that period Western supremacy would cease, or such a change take place in the empire that that city would no longer be considered the seat of government. From B.C. 31, a prophetic time, or 360 years, would bring us to 8330, and it hence becomes a noteworthy fact that the seat of empire was removed from Rome to Constantinople by Constantine the Great in that very year. See Encyclopedia Americana article Constantinople.
Anyone would like to comment on this? No? Okay, let's move on.
Verse 26. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. The cause of Antony's overthrow was the desertion of his allies and friends, those that fed of the portion of his meat. First Cleopatra, as already described, suddenly withdrew from the battle, taking 60 ships of the line with her. Secondly, the land army, disgusted with the infatuation of Antony, went over to Caesar, who received them with open arms. Thirdly, when Antony arrived at Libya, he found that the forces which he had there left under Scarpus to guard the frontier had declared for Caesar. Fourthly, being followed by Caesar into Egypt, he was betrayed by Cleopatra, and his forces surrendered to Caesar. Hereupon, in rage and despair, he took his own life. Verse 27. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Antony and Caesar were formerly in alliance, yet under the garb of friendship they were both aspiring and intriguing for universal dominion. Their protestations of deference to and friendship for each other were the utterances of hypocrites. They spoke lies at one table. Octavia, the wife of Antony and sister of Caesar, declared to the people of Rome, at the time Antony divorced her, that she had consented to marry him solely with the hope that it would prove a pledge of union between Caesar and Antony. But that counsel did not prosper. The rupture came, and in the conflict that ensued, Caesar came off entirely victorious. Verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits, and return to his own land. Two returnings from foreign conquest are here brought to view. The first after the events narrated in verses 26 and 27, and the second after this power had had indignation against the holy covenant, and had performed exploits. The first was fulfilled in the return of Caesar after his expedition against Egypt and Antony. He returned to Rome with abundant honor and riches. For, says Prideaux, at this time such vast riches were brought to Rome from Egypt on the reducing of that country, and the return of Octavianus, Caesar, and his army from thence, that the value of money fell 1/2, and the prices of provisions and all vendible wares was doubled thereon. Caesar celebrated his victories in a 3 days' triumph, a triumph which Cleopatra herself would have graced, as one of the royal captives, had she not artfully caused herself to be bitten by the fatal asp. The next great enterprise of the Romans after the overthrow of Egypt was the expedition against Judea, and the capture and destruction of Jerusalem. The Holy Covenant is doubtless the covenant which God has maintained with his people under different forms, in different ages of the world, that is, with all believers in him. The Jews rejected Christ, and according to the prophecy that all who would not hear that prophet should be cut off, they were destroyed out of their own land, and scattered to every nation under heaven. And while Jews and Christians alike suffered under the oppressive hands of the Romans, it was doubtless in the reduction of Judea especially that the exploits mentioned in the text were exhibited. Under Vespasian the Romans invaded Judea, and took the cities of Galilee, Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, where Christ had been rejected. They destroyed the inhabitants and left nothing but ruin and desolation. Titus besieged Jerusalem. He drew a trench around it, according to the prediction of the Savior. A terrible famine ensued, the equal of which the world has perhaps at no other time witnessed. Moses had predicted that in the terrible calamities to come upon the Jews, if they departed from God, even the tender and delicate woman should eat her own children in the straitness of the siege wherewith their enemies should distress them. Under the siege of Jerusalem by Titus, a literal fulfillment of this prediction occurred, and he, hearing of the inhuman deed, but forgetting that he was the one who was driving them to such direful extremities, swore the eternal extirpation of the accursed city and people. Jerusalem fell in AD 70. As an honor to himself, the Roman commander had determined to save the temple, but the Lord had said that there should not remain one stone upon another, which should not be thrown down. A Roman soldier seized a brand of fire and climbing upon the shoulders of his comrades, thrust it into one of the windows of the beautiful structure. It was soon in the arms of the devouring element. The frantic efforts of the Jews to extinguish the flames were seconded by Titus himself, but all in vain. Seeing that the temple must perish, Titus rushed in and bore away the golden candlestick, the table of showbread, and the volume of the law, wrapped in the golden tissue. The candlestick was afterward deposited in Vespasian's temple of peace, and copied on the triumphal arch of Titus, where its mutilated image is yet to be seen. The siege of Jerusalem lasted 5 months. In that siege 1,100,000 Jews perished, and 97,000 were taken prisoners. The city was so amazingly strong that Titus exclaimed, when viewing the ruins, "We have fought with the assistance of God." But it was completely leveled, and the foundations of the temple were plowed up by Terentius Rufus. The duration of the whole war was 7 years, and 1,462,000 persons are said to have fallen victims to its awful horrors. Thus this power performed great exploits, and again returned to his own land.
Anyone would like to comment on this?
Hello, everyone.
No.
2 seconds. Just gonna put my video. Yes. Hello.
Nice to see you, Brother Jay.
Yeah. I'm just actually wondering about how Uriah Smith fit all these verses and the history with the history at the same time, actually. And because I know that Uriah Smith was heavily criticized as well when it comes to his book, and I just wanted to understand on how he actually gathered this information and how he fits all this. Does anyone have an opinion about it?
As you can imagine, he took a lot of time to look into history.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's not only him. As you can see, he is citing other authors and historians, which inspired him to write these things. So obviously, he studied a lot of historians before writing this down. So
Because it's so amazing, isn't it? It's really like amazing to see how the Bible fits exactly to to the history, and it's amazing to find out now that because it for me, if I'm not doubting the writing. It's just that I'm just amazed. I just wanted to understand more with regards to and I believe that this was also guided by the Holy Spirit. And yeah, one thing that I'd like to understand is how did he gather all this information and fit them? Or does he, I know he did the carefully studies and things like that. But it's just amazing. So, and with this, I can see that it only gives us a better picture on how it's like a bit more explanation about the book of Daniel.
I'm thinking as well about this, and I think it's quite amazing that in our days, we have the Google, our good old friend Google, which helps a lot when we want to research something. But in his days, he didn't have any of this. No mobile phones, no internet, no nothing. So the source of information would be books and manuscripts and history, real history papers, which you would find in a massive library, where you could study all these things. And I would like to add that in the libraries, in these massive libraries, the information would be accurate, because it would be the original things. Now, people, if they want to go on Wikipedia, they can change and alter things, and we know that actually the history written on the internet many times have been altered and changed to suit certain groups. So it's not that reliable anymore, and that's why it's this feeling of doubt. Man, how we know it's real, how we know it's true, all these things.
Kind of like tampered the authenticity of the information from the Wikipedia.
Yeah, that's right. Even you, if you go there, you can write whatever you like.
Yeah.
And like that,
Yeah, I would also like to add that when I was doing my first degree, for instance, in Ghana, the internet wasn't very popular, and we had to go to the library to get the books, and you could get all of these books, very old books and modern books as well, to quote for your research and everything. And I find those as more authentic than the references that we find on the internet now, like you've been saying, Brother Soren, that they've been, some of them have been modified, tampered with, and even with Ellen White's books as well, some of those have been tampered with.
Yes, sadly to say.
Well, I'm sure also that it is God's plan that this history is still available to us, so that those that want to search for the truth can add the history books to the Bible to do this. So we question it. We question how we still have all these things to put together, but we have to have the will to want to do it, because there are so many Christians who just wouldn't bother with any history. Won't I come across some recently, and they're just not interested in it at all. And you think, well, but it's brilliant, because it shows the Bible to be so true. But they just don't want to know it, so they won't search it, and they will miss out on some of the truths there, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's the element of time as well. At that time, they didn't have any of our fancy devices and everything. So for them, they had time to read, and they probably had a different diet as well, which helped them to process better than we in our days. Us, we have so much technology, but still we are in the fastest pace age ever, and we still don't have time, and it's just not enough time. Anyway, before most of you joined in, I had a little discussion with Sister Chrissy and Brother Johnny about fasting and getting accustomed with the feeling of hunger and resist the temptation of eating and staying calm in such circumstances, because the time of trouble, as never was, is coming, and obviously needs a special preparation for this time. In a way, I would call it special forces are needed, which would resist hunger, tiredness, and all that lot, which Ellen White specifies in the Spirit of Prophecy. And we can see here that the siege of Jerusalem lasted 5 months. That is not even long. 5 months was enough. I'll highlight this. And look here, I'll highlight this. The siege of Jerusalem lasted 5 months. And here is this. Moses had predicted, and that it can be found in Deuteronomy chapter 28, yeah? Verses 54 and 50 to 56, that in the terrible calamities to come upon the Jews if they departed from God, even the tender and delicate woman should eat her own children in the strength of the siege. And we can see what disgust Titus had, because under the siege of Jerusalem and by Titus, a literal fulfillment of this prediction occurred. And he, Titus, hearing of this inhuman deed, but forgetting that he was the one who was driving them to such direful extremities, swore the eternal extirpation of the accursed city and people. They were accursed. You know, it is a serious matter. Just 5 months. Just imagine if we'll have a complete lockdown for 5 months, and already considering the lockdowns which took place this year, you can be sure that the food supply will not be the same like last year and so on. So will be less food. More people every day. It's coming news to my telephone, and it says 1,000 people laid off from blah blah store, another 1,500 from another, and so on, from a chain of stores and from other institutions and so on. I mean, all these people will be jobless. They will have no food, and they have families to feed and so on. And you know how deep is the government's pocket, you know? So just put all these things together, and what Ellen White said about the end of time, that we need to move to the country and to have our own piece of land, become really actual, really present time. 5 months was enough for that tender and delicate woman to come to the point of doing such things. You know, I'm not going to do another sermon on this, but you know, it's all together about knowing how to fast, to control our appetite and our emotions and our desires, not becoming beasts in such situations. It's about diet as well. You can imagine those who are not used to anything else but chicken and flesh meat. They'll have a real problem, you know, to eat leaves from the tree or something which a horse eats and survives, you know. But the vegetarian, which is used with the taste of vegetables, would not find extremely difficult to take something from the grass, which God provides in the nature, to take and eat, you know, without to be cooked and anything, you know. Just think of all this. Yeah.
Can I quickly read something?
Go for it.
Just about, we talked about the siege of Leningrad earlier,
Yeah.
and it says here that workers ate grease from bearings in factory machines and drank oil from oil cans. Such was their hunger. Where people died in the street, there was a scramble for their ration card. If this happened, and now it's quoting this person, if this happened, there was an immediate scrabbling for the dead one's ration card, not because anyone wanted to steal it, but because everyone realized that a ration card handed into the authorities meant an infinitesimal portion more food for all. Such were the indignities we suffered. I watched my father and mother die. I knew perfectly well they were starving, but I wanted their bread more than I wanted them to stay alive. And they knew that about me too. That's what I remember about the blockade. That feeling that you wanted your parents to die because you wanted their bread. You know,
It's
I don't know, I'm sort of speechless. That kind of sums up what I believe. A time of trouble such as never was means a time of trouble worse than the siege of Leningrad. My mind can't even grasp it at all.
yeah. But Ellen G. White, in the Last Day Event book, have given us information, isn't it, to avoid this as
Oh
much as
yeah,
possible. And moving into country is one thing that Ellen G. White have mentioned in particular, in order for us to be out of that situation, because it's not only the hunger, it's not only the, that will suffer actually, it's the conflict in our mind, because you have to choose between, um, staying alive and staying faithful. That's the hardest, that will be the hardest challenge to face by such Christians. And it's that's why it is very important that as of now we still have time. We should be grateful that we still have time to do these things, and we have to ask the Holy Spirit to put us in the situation where God wants us to be. And because at the moment we are still blinded and we are still clouded with so much things, and this needs to clear up before we can actually do our move.
Thank you. Yes, true.
Can I say that we need to seriously pray about this as well? We've been praying about it every day, and we've set an alarm as well at 6 p.m. every evening to pray about it. So because we just I don't know how we can manage it unless God intervenes. So if you can all join us to pray about it at 6 o'clock, and also when we wake up first thing in the morning to pray about it.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely prayer is needed as well.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on if there's no other interventions from you. Verse 29.
Verse 29. At the time appointed he shall return, and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. The time appointed is probably the prophetic time of verse 24, which has been previously mentioned. It closed, as already shown, in AD 330, at which time this power was to return and come again toward the south, but not as on the former occasion when it went to Egypt, nor as the latter when it went to Judea. Those were expeditions which resulted in conquest and glory. This one led to demoralization and ruin. The removal of the seat of empire to Constantinople was the signal for the downfall of the empire. Rome then lost its prestige. The western division was exposed to the incursions of foreign enemies. On the death of Constantine, the Roman Empire was divided into three parts. Between his three sons, Constantinus, Constantine II, and Constans. Constantine II and Constans quarreled, and Constans, being victor, gained the supremacy of the whole West. He was soon slain by one of his commanders, who in turn was shortly after defeated by the surviving emperor, and in despair ended his own days, 8353. The barbarians of the north now began their incursions, and extended their conquests till the imperial power of the West expired in AD 476. This was indeed different from the two former movements brought to view in the prophecy, and to this the fatal step of removing the seat of empire from Rome to Constantinople directly led. Verse 30. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return, and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. The prophetic narrative still has reference to the power which has been the subject of the prophecy from the 16th verse, namely Rome. What were the ships of Chittim that came against this power? And when was this movement made? What country or power is meant by Chittim? Dr. A. Clark on Isaiah chapter 23 verse 1 has this note, From the land of Chittim it is revealed to them. The news of the destruction of Tyre by Nebuchadnezzar is said to be brought to them from Chittim, the islands and coasts of the Mediterranean. For the Tyrians, says Jerome on verse 6, when they saw they had no other means of escape, fled in their ships and took refuge in Carthage, and in the islands of the Ionian and Aegean seas, so also Jacre on the same place. Kitto gives the same locality to Chittim, namely the coast and islands of the Mediterranean, and the mind is carried by the testimony of Jerome to a definite and celebrated city situated in that land, that is, Carthage. Was ever a naval warfare with Carthage as a base of operations waged against the Roman Empire? We have but to think of the terrible onslaught of the Vandals upon Rome under the fierce Genseric to answer readily in the affirmative. Sallying every spring from the port of Carthage at the head of his numerous and well-disciplined naval forces, he spread consternation through all the maritime provinces of the empire. That this is the work brought to view is further evident when we consider that we are brought down in the prophecy to this very time. In verse 29, the transfer of empire to Constantinople we understood to be mentioned. Following in due course of time as the next remarkable revolution came the eruptions of the barbarians of the north, prominent among which was the Vandal War, already mentioned. The years 8428 to 468 marked the career of Genseric. He shall be grieved and return. This may have reference to the desperate efforts which were made to dispossess Genseric of the sovereignty of the seas, the first by Majorian, the second by Leo, both of which proved to be utter failures, and Rome was obliged to submit to the humiliation of seeing its provinces ravaged and its eternal city pillaged by the enemy. See on Revelation chapter 8, verse 8. Indignation against the covenant, that is, the Holy Scriptures, the book of the covenant. A revolution of this nature was accomplished in Rome. The Heruli, Goths, and Vandals who conquered Rome embraced the Arian faith and became enemies of the Catholic Church. It was especially for the purpose of exterminating this heresy that Justinian decreed the Pope to be the head of the Church and the corrector of heretics. The Bible soon came to be regarded as a dangerous book that should not be read by the common people, but all questions in dispute were to be submitted to the Pope. Thus was indignity heaped upon God's word, and the emperors of Rome, the eastern division of which still continued, had intelligence or connived with the Church of Rome, which had forsaken the covenant and constituted the great apostasy, for the purpose of putting down heresy. The man of sin was raised to his presumptuous throne by the defeat of the Arian Goths, who then held possession of Rome in AD 538.
Any comments? Okay, let's move on.
Verse 31. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. The power of the empire was committed to the carrying on of the work before mentioned, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, or Rome. If this applies to the barbarians, it was literally fulfilled. For Rome was sacked by the Goths and Vandals, and the imperial power of the West ceased through the conquest of Rome by Odoacer. Or if it refers to those rulers of the empire who were working in behalf of the papacy against the pagan and all other opposing religions, it would signify the removal of the seat of empire from Rome to Constantinople, which contributed its measure of influence to the downfall of Rome. The passage would then be parallel to Daniel chapter 8, verse 11, and Revelation chapter 13, verse 2. And they shall take away the daily sacrifice. It was shown on Daniel chapter 8, verse 13, that sacrifice is a word erroneously supplied, that it should be desolation, and that the expression denotes a desolating power, of which the abomination of desolation is but the counterpart, and to which it succeeds in point of time. The daily desolation was paganism. The abomination of desolation is the papacy. But it may be asked how this can be the papacy, since Christ spoke of it in connection with the destruction of Jerusalem. And the answer is, Christ evidently referred to the 9th chapter of Daniel, which is a prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem, and not to this verse of chapter 11, which does not refer to that event. Daniel in the 9th chapter speaks of desolations and abominations plural. More than one abomination, therefore, treads down the church. That is, so far as the church is concerned, both paganism and the papacy are abominations. But as distinguished from each other, the language is restricted, and one is the daily desolation, and the other is preeminently the transgression or abomination of desolation. How was the daily or paganism taken away? As this is spoken of in connection with the placing or setting up of the abomination of desolation, or the papacy, it must denote not merely the nominal change of the religion of the empire from paganism to Christianity, as on the conversion so called of Constantine, but such an eradication of paganism from all the elements of the empire, that the way would be all open for the papal abomination to arise and assert its arrogant claims. Such a revolution as this, plainly defined, was accomplished, but not for nearly 200 years after the death of Constantine. As we approach the year 8508, we behold a grand crisis ripening between Catholicism and the pagan influences still existing in the empire. Up to the time of the conversion of Clovis, King of France, 8496, the French and other nations of Western Europe were pagan, but subsequently to that event, the efforts to convert idolaters to Romanism were crowned with great success. The conversion of Clovis is said to have been the occasion of bestowing upon the French monarch the titles of Most Christian Majesty and eldest son of the Church. Between that time and 8508, by alliances, capitulations, and conquests, the Arborici, the Roman garrisons in the west, Brittany, the Burgundians, and the Visigoths were brought into subjection. From the time when these successes were fully accomplished, namely 508, the papacy was triumphant so far as paganism was concerned. For though the latter doubtless retarded the progress of the Catholic faith, yet it had not the power, if it had the disposition, to suppress the faith and hinder the encroachments of the Roman pontiff. When the prominent powers of Europe gave up their attachment to paganism, it was only to perpetuate its abominations in another form, for Christianity as exhibited in the Catholic Church was and is only paganism baptized. In England, Arthur, the first Christian king, founded the Christian worship on the ruins of the pagan. Rapin, Book 2, page 124, who claims to be exact in the chronology of events, states that he was elected monarch of Britain in 508. The condition of the See of Rome was also peculiar at this time. In 498, Symmachus ascended the pontifical throne as a recent convert from paganism. He reigned to 8514. He found his way to the papal chair, says Dupin, by striving with his competitor even unto blood. He received adulation as the successor of St. Peter, and struck the keynote of papal assumption by presuming to excommunicate the Emperor Anastasius. The most servile flatterers of the Pope now began to maintain that he was constituted judge in the place of God, and that he was the vicegerent of the Most High. Such was the direction in which events were tending in the West. What posture did affairs at the same time assume in the East? A strong papal party now existed in all parts of the empire. The adherents of this cause in Constantinople, encouraged by the success of their brethren in the West, deemed it safe to commence open hostilities in behalf of their master at Rome. In 508 their partisan zeal culminated in a whirlwind of fanaticism and civil war, which swept in fire and blood through the streets of the eastern capital. Gibbon, under the years 508 to 518, speaking of the commotions in Constantinople, says, "The statues of the emperor were broken, and his person was concealed in a suburb, till at the end of 3 days he dared to implore the mercy of his subjects. With his diadem, and in the posture of a suppliant, Anastasius appeared on the throne of the circus. The Catholics before his face rehearsed their genuine trisagion. They exulted in the offer which he proclaimed by the voice of a herald of abdicating the purple. They listened to the admonition that since all could not reign, they should previously agree in the choice of a sovereign, and they accepted the blood of 2 unpopular ministers whom their master without hesitation condemned to the lions. These furious but transient seditions were encouraged by the success of Vitalian, who with an army of Huns and Bulgarians, for the most part idolaters, declared himself the champion of the Catholic faith. In this pious rebellion he depopulated Thrace, besieged Constantinople, exterminated 65,000 of his fellow Christians, till he obtained the recall of the bishops, the satisfaction of the Pope, and the establishment of the Council of Chalcedon, an orthodox treaty, reluctantly signed by the dying Anastasius, and more faithfully performed by the uncle Justinian. And such was the event of the first of the religious wars which had been waged in the name and by the disciples of the God of peace." The Decline and Fall of Rome, Volume 4, page 526. Let it be marked that in this year 508 paganism had so far declined, and Catholicism had so far relatively increased in strength, that the Catholic Church for the first time waged a successful war against both the civil authority of the empire and the Church of the East, which for the most part had embraced the monophysite doctrine. The extermination of 65,000 heretics was the result. With the following extract, we close the testimony on this point. We now invite our modern Gamaliels to take a position with us in the place of the sanctuary of paganism, since claimed as the patrimony of St. Peter in 508. We look a few years into the past, and the rude paganism of the northern barbarians is pouring down upon the nominally Christian empire of Western Rome, triumphing everywhere, and its triumphs everywhere distinguished by the most savage cruelty. The empire falls, and is broken into fragments. One by one, the lords and rulers of these fragments abandon their paganism and profess the Christian faith. In religion, the conquerors are yielding to the conquered. But still, paganism is triumphant. Among its supporters there is one stern and successful conqueror, Clovis, but soon he also bows before the power of the new faith and becomes its champion. He is still triumphant, but as a hero and conqueror reaches the zenith point at which we occupy, AD 508. In or near the same year, the last important subdivision of the fallen empire is publicized, and by the coronation of its triumphant monarch, Christianized. The pontiff for the period on which we stand is a recently converted pagan. The bloody contest which placed him in the chair was decided by the interposition of an Arian king. He is bowed to and saluted as filling the place of God on earth. The Senate is so far under his power that on suspicion that the interests of the See of Rome demand it, they excommunicate the emperor. In 508, the mine is sprung beneath the throne of the Western Empire. The result of the confusion and strife it occasions is the humiliation of its rightful lord. Now the question is, at what time was paganism so far suppressed as to make room for its substitute and successor, the papal abomination? When was this abomination placed in a position to start on its career of blasphemy and blood. Is there any other date for its being placed or set up in the room of paganism but 508? If the mysterious enchantress has not now brought all her victims within her power, she has taken her position, and some have yielded to the fascination. The others are at length subdued, and kings and peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues are brought under the spell which prepares them, even while drunken with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, to think that they are doing God's service, and to fancy themselves the exclusive favorites of heaven, while becoming an easier and richer prey for the damnation of hell. Second Advent Manual, pages 79 to 81. From these evidences, we think it clear that the daily or paganism was taken away in AD 508. This was preparatory to the setting up or establishment of the papacy, which was a separate and subsequent event. Of this the prophetic narrative now leads us to speak. And they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Having shown quite fully what constituted the taking away of the daily or paganism, we now inquire, when was the abomination that maketh desolate, or the papacy placed or set up? The little horn that had eyes like the eyes of a man was not slow to see when the way was open for his advancement and elevation. From the year 508, his progress toward universal supremacy was without parallel. When Justinian was about to commence the Vandal War, 8533, an enterprise of no small magnitude and difficulty, he wished to secure the influence of the Bishop of Rome, who had then attained a position in which his opinion had great weight throughout a large portion of Christendom. Justinian therefore took it upon himself to decide the contest which had long existed between the sees of Rome and Constantinople, as to which should have the precedence, by giving the preference to Rome, and declaring in the fullest and most unequivocal terms that the bishop of that city should be chief of the whole ecclesiastical body of the empire. A work on the Apocalypse by Reverend George Crowley of England, published in 1827, presents a detailed account of the events by which the supremacy of the Pope of Rome was secured. He gives the following as the terms in which the letter of Justinian was expressed. Justinian, pious, fortunate, renowned, triumphant, emperor, consul, etc., to John, the most holy Archbishop of our city of Rome, and Patriarch, rendering honor to the apostolic chair and to your holiness, as has been always and is our wish, and honoring your blessedness as a father, we have hastened to bring to the knowledge of your holiness all matters relating to the state of the churches, it having been at all times our great desire to preserve the unity of your apostolic chair and the constitution of the holy churches of God, which has obtained hitherto and still obtains. Therefore we have made no delay in subjecting and uniting to your holiness all the priests of the whole East. We cannot suffer that anything which relates to the state of the Church, however manifest and unquestionable, should be moved without the knowledge of your holiness, who is the head of all the holy churches. For in all things, as we have already declared, we are anxious to increase the honor and authority of your apostolic chair. Crowley, pages 114 to 115. The Emperor's letter, continues Mr. Crowley, must have been sent before the 25th of March, 533, for in his letter of that date to Epiphanius he speaks of its having been already dispatched, and repeats his decision that all affairs touching the Church should be referred to the Pope, head of all bishops, and the true and effective corrector of heretics. The Pope in his answer, returned the same month of the following year, 534, observes that among the virtues of Justinian one shines as a star, his reverence for the apostolic chair, to which he has subjected and united all the churches, it being truly the head of all. The novella of the Justinian Code give unanswerable proof of the authenticity of the title. The preamble of the 9th states that as the elder Rome was the founder of the laws, so was it not to be questioned that in her was the supremacy of the pontificate. The 131st, on the Ecclesiastical Titles and Privileges, Chapter 2, states, "We therefore decree that the most holy Pope of the elder Rome is the first of all the priesthood, and that the most blessed Archbishop of Constantinople, the new Rome, shall hold the second rank after the holy apostolic chair of the elder Rome." Toward the close of the 6th century, John of Constantinople denied the Roman supremacy and assumed for himself the title of universal bishop, whereupon Gregory the Great, indignant at the usurpation, denounced John and declared with unconscious truth that he who would assume the title of universal bishop was Antichrist. Phocas in 606 suppressed the claim of the Bishop of Constantinople and vindicated that of the Bishop of Rome. But Phocas was not the founder of papal supremacy. Says Crowley, that Phocas repressed the claim of the Bishop of Constantinople is beyond doubt. But the highest authorities among the civilians and annalists of Rome spurn the idea that Phocas was the founder of the supremacy of Rome. They ascend to Justinian as the only legitimate source, and rightly date the title from the memorable year 533. Again he says, on reference to Baronius, the established authority among the Roman Catholic annalists, I found the whole detail of Justinian's grants of supremacy to the Pope formerly given. The entire transaction was of the most authentic and regular kind, and suitable to the importance of the transfer. Apocalypse, page 8. Such were the circumstances attending the decree of Justinian, but the provisions of this decree could not at once be carried into effect, for Rome and Italy were held by the Ostrogoths, who were Arians in faith, and strongly opposed to the religion of Justinian and the Pope. It was therefore evident that the Ostrogoths must be rooted out of Rome before the Pope could exercise the power with which he had been clothed. To accomplish this object, the Italian War was commenced in 534. The management of the campaign was entrusted to Belisarius. On his approach toward Rome, several cities forsook Vitiges, their Gothic and heretical sovereign, and joined the armies of the Catholic emperor. The Goths, deciding to delay offensive operations till spring, allowed Belisarius to enter Rome without opposition. The deputies of the Pope and clergy, of the Senate and people, invited the lieutenant of Justinian to accept their voluntary allegiance. Belisarius entered Rome December 10, 536. But this was not an end of the struggle, for the Goths, rallying their forces, resolved to dispute his possession of the city by a regular siege. They commenced in March 537. Belisarius feared despair and treachery on the part of the people. Several senators and Pope Silverius, on proof or suspicion of treason, were sent into exile. The emperor commanded the clergy to elect a new bishop. After solemnly invoking the Holy Ghost, says Gibbon, they elected the deacon Vigilus, who by a bribe of 200 pounds of gold had purchased the honor. The whole nation of the Ostrogoths had been assembled for the siege of Rome, but success did not attend their efforts. Their hosts melted away in frequent and bloody combats under the city walls, and the year and 9 days during which the siege lasted witnessed almost the entire consumption of the whole nation. In the month of March 538, dangers beginning to threaten them from other quarters, they raised the siege, burned their tents, and retired in tumult and confusion from the city, with numbers scarcely sufficient to preserve their existence as a nation or their identity as a people. Thus the Gothic horn, the last of the three, was plucked up before the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. Nothing now stood in the way of the Pope to prevent his exercising the power conferred upon him by Justinian 5 years before. The saints, times, and laws were now in his hands, not in purpose only, but in fact. And this must therefore be taken as the year when this abomination was placed or set up, and as the point from which to date the predicted 1260 years of its supremacy.
think we'll stop here for tonight. It was a quite long reading, this last bit. My comments on what we've heard till now is we can see so clearly how all this fight for power, more power, and even more power was the fuel of the papacy from the beginning, from the inception, and we can see how this papacy is clearly a beast, destroying those who dare to oppose. And I remember the words of Jesus, who said, "My kingdom is not of this world." You know, it's that simple. His kingdom is not of this world. So all this politics and fight for supremacy and power is of the devil. Is simply of the devil. Any other comments before we close, please?
Yeah, I totally agree, because when I was in high school in the Philippines, we're studying history of the Philippines, and the very beginning was like I think what I can remember is when the Spanish during the Spanish regime, they came for three purposes. They call it 3G, which is the 3G, which is the God, gold, and glory. They came there to establish, first thing, one of the purposes is to establish Christianity, which is God, establish Christianity. And gold is to basically, because they can see that Philippines is rich in natural resources. So they want it's a tropical country and it's very good in agriculture. So that's what they want from the Philippines. And glory, obviously, is to establish the supremacy, the power, the authority, and it and yeah, um, we are. It is somehow, I can see that it's somehow um, good that the Christianity has been introduced in the Philippines, but one main thing that has been introduced, because the majority of the Philippines is Catholicism, but one main thing is that God never sleeps. He never let his people, you know, um, just have this sort of information, but then he is still, he still established the truth in some of the people in the Philippines, and because otherwise there will be no Seventh-day Adventists in the Philippines, there will be no Bible in the Philippines. And yeah, it's really it's amazing how we can see, you know, just for example, one country, for example, how it actually fits into the what the Bible is saying as well. So yeah, it's kind of like makes sense to me now that the history that I have learned before, all I know is just for the sake of fact, but I didn't realize this is actually connected to what the Bible is saying.
Yes. Any other comments about the um, expansion of papacy, which we just heard?
Where does he get his authority and power from?
Was given unto him.
It's it has supernatural power, doesn't it? The Antichrist. It's satanic. This is why he's kind of, it seems unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
And he receives his wound in 1798, as we believe. And looking around now, it seems that his wound is rapidly healing, and his power will only increase. except he performs his performs his warfare in different ways through intrigue and politics and medical tyranny, dare I say. And the latest things from the Pope, from the Catholic Church, that those who refuse vaccines are anti-Christian.
Yes, I read that today.
Yeah, I heard it today.
For the common good.
The common good. This is the key phrase, the common good. And that your individuality is subservient to the common good. And it's that battle, isn't it, between satanic coercion and God-given free will. And thus serving God and loving one another. And this is this kind of strong arm of coercion and compulsion that says, well, you are actually, if you are not part of the common good, you are expendable. Your life means nothing. And yeah.
There was a video from 5 years ago that was posted on Facebook, and it was a doctor from the Adventist Church, and he was saying that the Adventist Church has no stand on vaccines, and he was also saying that for a vaccine, if the benefits outweigh the risks, then they implement it. So, and also Auntie Heather posted a video on WhatsApp, which was really, really interesting, about how vaccines in the past have been really dangerous and how they've caused all sorts of complications.
Yeah.
And how when people take it to the authorities, they don't get sorted out. So, yeah, and recently listening to Walter White's videos about the UN's agenda and things like that, I've realized that all these evil plans were planned a very long time ago, and they're not new. And the things that have happened in the past will happen again.
Yeah.
Yes, Kwame?
The people who were doing the video were making the point that, like, because someone asked, did they have letters behind their name? And then they were saying that even if you have letters behind your name, it doesn't mean that you don't lie, because in the interview that they were referring to prove that vaccines are bad, the guy who was at the head of that vaccination for swine flu, the CDC, he was lying, and his colleagues were saying that he was lying, and the interviewer was saying that he was lying. And so these people who were using this interview, who were who were the people making the video, were saying that you can't even trust the people with letters behind their name because they lie. So that was also interesting to see how untruthful they are. And then he would come up with excuses for everything as well. When they tell him that he's lying and he's wrong, then he comes up with an excuse for his lies.
Yeah, one thing that stood out for me in the video that Sister Heather posted was that the vaccines which were tested on the people during the trials were not the vaccines that was given out to the people, which caused the diseases. And who knows that they will do that again to say we found a potent vaccine, people have had it and nothing has happened. And then they bring something else to vaccinate everyone.
And there are different vaccines which they brought up the different vaccine that they brought up, they hadn't tested it. They tested the other one, but I suspect personally that the reason why they did that is because the other vaccine actually worked. So because they didn't want a good vaccine going out to the people, they made a bad vaccine, and then they didn't test it because they knew they wouldn't be able to stand the test.
Possibly.
Yeah,
Possibly.
I don't know if you noticed that they prepare our minds that um, uh, because in the beginning will be a short supply of vaccines, they will actually the first lot of the vaccines will go to the key workers. Yeah, like the nurses, doctors, the medical people, and so on. You know, like the most important people, the key things. It's very interesting. This I was thinking, okay, so they want to give a bad vaccine to those people because obviously they don't want to kill these people. But is a point here because we'll give a good vaccine which will not harm anyone to these key people, and they will say, look, we gave to these important people, nobody died, and they are just fine, and that will gain the trust of the other people, of the masses, which will say, okay,
Perception.
yeah, and they will think they will get the same vaccines as the first lot, but the second lot will be nothing the same. You know, so you just can't trust. There's so much politics in this, and my question remains: if you are frightened of viruses and whatever, just fine with me. Just go and get vaccinated. It's absolutely so. Then, when you are vaccinated, you are immune, aren't you? Yeah. So you have nothing to fear. If I'm coming around you, and if I'm virus, I have the virus, and what you have nothing to fear because you got that vaccine. You are immune. So why do you call me your enemy? You know, you are the safe one. Why you are frightened of me? You know, so it makes no sense. It's just a terrible, terrible lie. All this.
It's interesting to me that the word doctor comes from the Latin. It means teacher and apostle. It's a word for the apostles, and it comes from the church. It comes from the Catholic Church. The whole thing, the whole system, when you go back and follow the string back to where things started, it always goes to the same place. It's our entire system.
Education.
Is the world wandering after the beast, and it's so clear to me. And when my dad told me that he'd gone to the front door banging his saucepan on a Thursday evening, you know, I felt for him, you know. I thought, without even knowing it, you're giving obeisance, you're giving honor to the beast power by doing that. And it's just everywhere. I got a new bandana today. I'm very proud of it. Just so that I don't get into any arguments. It's a pretty purple one. So it's got the colours of the harlot.
I just wanted to add up what Jesus say from the Bible with regards to all this deception happening. In Matthew 24:11, he said that, and many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. Finally, in verses 24, Jesus said, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, in so much that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect.
Mm.
So the highlighted part there is deception. You know,
Yeah.
they come. You know, this Satan is using so many, venues to deceive people. The ultimate goal here is to deceive, is to deceive people, more souls. And he uses health, like what Brother John is saying, health tyranny. Or is that the word you use? Yeah,
Medical tyranny, yeah.
your medical tyranny. And he uses media is a powerful tool, you know. And yeah, he uses religion first and foremost as well. And 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 that's just to, the hidden agenda there is the deception to deceive people. And unfortunately, there are so many souls out there that needs to know the truth.
Yeah.
And it's so sad, it's so sad. My parents in particular, they're very, very, I don't know, I can't judge them because I don't know what's in their heart. But based on the practices that I can see and I can observe, is, if I were to judge them, they definitely are deceived by this belief, you know. And it's so sad. It's really hard to, it's so difficult to grasp this this filthiness that we can see. And how do you say that, you like flashing right in your face, basically. But then, thankfully, we have hope. We have hope. There is God, there is Jesus. God is still in control. We know that God is still in control. And like what brother Soren said, there's nothing to worry about. What if we got the virus? So what if we got this? We've got all this around us. That's fine as long as we hold on to the truth, as long as we keep our faith. It's easy said than done, but that's what we should be aiming for.
Yes. Yeah, yes, that's right. Thank you very much, Brother Jay. It might be distressing, it might be at times scary, but we need to overcome the fear, because the perfect love casts out fear, and those who have the fear have not yet been perfected. So we need to focus on this connection, the only connection which will hold. And don't worry about anything else. Our hope needs to be in the life after, not in this life, with this body which perishes. We want the other body, that body which will never be destroyed. That is what is our aim. Anyway.
It's quite strange because today I had a text message come through on my mobile phone. Did I want to book for my flu vaccine?
Oh no.
Just today. So I was allowed to choose.
Wow.
So I said no, I didn't want it. Thank you. All done. I thought, well, it's amazing. That came through today.
I've seen today a joke on Facebook, a Romanian page, and they said how you should refuse the vaccine. There are 3 steps. First step, open your mouth. Second step, say no, thank you. Third step, close your mouth. It's
That's Romanian humor for you.
Yeah, I think so. So I found that quite funny. Yeah, it's that simple. It's here. You made the decision, and you just let them know. That's all. Anyway, that was a beautiful evening again. let's have
I would
a.
like to request a song, please,
Oh,
before we
please.
close,
Okay.
if we can sing.
Yeah, let's listen. What is the request? And then I'll ask Brother Johnny to close with a prayer, please.
506, a mighty fortress is our God.
506, you said?
Yeah.
506. Here we go.
I'm just going to read 2 Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 22 to 26. Flee also youthful lusts, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. But foolish and unlearned questions avoid, knowing that they do gender strifes. And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach, patient, in meekness instructing those